Angelica Spurb.
Welcome to episode 78 of Spurb's Herbs. Today we're going to be talking about an interesting Chinese formula, Gan Cao Gan Jiang Fu. I can't even read the Fu Ling Bai Zhu Tang. So sorry for my Chinese as usual. Gan Cao Gan Jiang Fu Ling Bai Zhu Tang, or licorice, ginger, poria, and white atractylodes decoction. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So today we're looking at another traditional Chinese formula, Gan Cao Gan Jiang Fu Ling Bai Zhu Tang. Now that's a mouthful, but as we're going to find out, that's actually the name of all the herbs that are in this formula. So that's licorice, ginger, poria, and white atractylodes decoction. This is a formula that warms the spleen and overcomes dampness. And of course, we're going to talk about that as we go along. As always, we will do our deep dive into this herb formula and look at its traditional uses and its preparation, interactions, and cautions. And as usual, we'll be adding something a little different. We're going to talk a little bit about mandatory reporting, so definitely a little bit different. It's going to be another interesting expedition into the exciting universe of herbs. Please join us. So I've been teaching for quite a while now on a wide variety of topics. If you like this podcast and want to explore more of my courses, they are available at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org and include a ton of different topics, including my drug herb series, looking at drugs and how they interact with herbs and vice versa, several ethics and safety courses, Chinese medical research, several treatment of condition courses such as arthritis, neck and back pain, COVID, and depression and anxiety, and one of my favorite courses of all time, the Chinese Herbal First Aid Kit. And they're all at a reasonable cost to begin with, and for listening to this podcast, you can get an additional 20% off with the code SH20OFF. That's all lowercase, SH for Spurb's Herbs, 20 off. So please feel free to take a look at those courses at integrativemedicinecouncil.org. So I said for a little something different today, we're going to talk about mandatory reporting. So as acupuncturists and herbalists, as well as other licensed professionals, we may be mandatory reporters. And if you're not a licensed professional, then this is still interesting information for you to know what does need to be reported and what doesn't. So we may be mandatory reporters, or maybe we aren't mandatory reporters. And what does being a mandatory reporter mean? So we're briefly going to discuss these questions today. If you want to know more about this topic, I have a 1-hour continuing education course available at that www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org that we just did. And if you use that SH20 off, you get 20% off of it. So the first question a practitioner needs to ask is whether they are mandatory reporters. States and countries may have different laws in this matter. In California, we are considered medical practitioners, and therefore we are mandatory reporters. Other states may not have similar laws, or they may say we are reporters for certain situations, but not others. Whether or not, however, it is mandatory, it may still be ethical, and a practitioner should consider reporting any cases that would fall under our discussion today. So even if it's not mandatory, what does mandatory mean in this case? Mandatory reporting means that if you don't report something, then there are consequences in law. It can affect your license. There's actually a situation happening. I was just reading about it this week where someone is actually being sued for it's a pastor who did not report suspected sexual abuse against a child. And he is being pursued. He's actually been arrested and is being prosecuted for that and can be put in jail. So there are consequences if you are mandatory and don't do it. Now, if you're not mandatory, you can still report it. It's still ethical. It's still appropriate. You may not have all the protections, but you definitely have all the ethics behind you. So let's talk about this. So what do we actually report? Might we be required to report? So one of those areas where we might be mandatory reporting is in diseases, and many diseases must be reported in order to protect population safety. These are generally communicable or have an unusual risk for society. And what's interesting is one disease that is usually not included in these lists of diseases is HIV. Even though back in the day I was around, I mean, I remember the very first reports of it. I was fascinated with it when it first started coming out in the early 80s. I was a kid, but I was interested in medicine, so I was interested in it. But the reason why that wasn't is because there are laws that specifically say you can't be, because otherwise people wouldn't get tested and things like that. So it can get convoluted, but there are long lists. In fact, I have a long list that I usually, in my 1 hour I talk about, but it's too long to talk about here. They may change slightly or sometimes dramatically from county to county, state to state, and country to country. In California, each county has their own health department, and they may have different diseases that you may or may not have to report based on the county you're in as well. So you have to look this up for where you're at. Another area where we have to do mandatory reporting is in abuse. In most states, both elder abuse and child abuse must be reported to authorities. Most locales have something like adult protective services and child protective services to receive reports. Now, that's state California. I know there's like my wife's from New Jersey, so she's aware of something called DIFUS. I don't even, probably Department of something safety. I don't even know, but that would be their child protective service. So everyone has their own sort of name to it. Don't hesitate to call. They will make the determination if intervention is necessary. If you suspect something, go ahead and call it in. You have a lot more risk in not reporting suspected abuse than in reporting it. In California, failure to report is a misdemeanor crime punishable by up to 6 months in jail and or up to a $1,000 fine. And there are protections if you report it. If you do it in good faith, you cannot be held liable. So very little downside for reporting it, quite a bit of downside if you don't report it. So report it. So let's talk briefly about elder abuse. Harmful treatment of people include abandonment, isolation, abduction, emotional, financial, verbal, mental, sexual, or physical abuse, corporal punishment, involuntary restraint or seclusion, neglect, the failure to provide care necessary to prevent physical or mental harm, deprivations of goods or services that are necessary to avoid physical harm or mental suffering. And physical and financial abuse are the most common forms that we see in the real world. The elderly often do not report abuse because they fear retaliation, not being believed, and or shame about being abused. Now, I've had to call in for elder abuse and report it, and I got to say the process was straightforward, was relatively easy, and they were very helpful on the other end. That's where I'm at. They were very helpful, and it did turn out there was elder abuse, and the person doing it actually ended up in jail, last I heard. So it was really good that we reported it, and so do it. You know, it's not an issue. So child abuse, of course, we hear about this all the time. Unfortunately, an abused child is one who has suffered intentional, serious, mental, emotional, sexual, and or physical injury by a parent or other person responsible for the child's care. Some states add in suffering from starvation, moral neglect, and or immoral associations. And according to one of my sources, an abused child is generally defined as a person younger than 18 years of age whose parent or other person legally responsible for his or her care does any of a number of physical, mental, or sexual abuses. So any of those would count as child abuse. Another category of mandatory reporting is suicide and harm. It is mandatory to report a patient who is in quote-unquote imminent danger of harm to self or others. Call your county's mental health department. They will talk you through the process and confirm the imminent danger. You can call the police if actions are impending. It's one thing to say, I have a gun at home, and as soon as I leave here, I'm going to use it on myself. That's imminent danger. You got to call mental health department. If they have the gun in their purse, and they say as soon as they walk out into the lobby, they're going to use it. That is impending action, call the police. So there's a little bit of difference. That word imminent danger, that phrase imminent danger is very important. Again, I have had to report this. When I was a supervisor, I had a patient who said she was suicidal, but she was not in imminent danger. So instead of reporting, we actually called her psychologist, and he said, yes, I'm aware of it. We're working with it. Don't worry about it. And that was the end of that. So I did follow up, and it was an imminent danger. And that was kind of early in my career where I didn't really know this term imminent danger. And so if I had known it, I probably wouldn't have gone down that road. But another area of potential mandatory reporting is domestic violence. Any health practitioner employed in a health facility, clinic, physician's office, local or state, public health department, and or clinic or other type of facility operated by a local or state public health department who, in his or her professional capacity or within the scope of his or her employment, provides medical services for a physical condition to a patient whom he or she knows or reasonably suspects is a victim of domestic violence, shall immediately make a report even if the patient denies abuse. So this actually, if you listen to what I just said, it sounds very lawyer-esque, and I believe I got it. I did it a long time ago, and unfortunately, I'm really good at keeping track of my sources. I did not on this. I think it was probably from a website of a lawyer or something along those lines, and it was probably in the state of California. So this, again, may or may not be helpful for those in other states. For a long time, I didn't think we needed to report domestic violence, and then as I looked more into it, yes, we do need to. The law had changed, and we do need to, at least in the state of California, because what was happening is people just weren't reporting it, and then it would escalate. So again, something to look at where you're located. It's impossible for any person like me to know all the laws everywhere in all the countries, all the states where this could be at. Just in today's people listening today, I have people from all over the world. I have, I think, at least 8 countries that are have signed up for listening to this, and I know there's a lot more once it hits the actual podcast universe. So yeah, there's a lot of different laws out there. So when you do report, there's no legal requirement to inform the patient of the report. However, ethically, you should inform the patient of your obligation as a mandatory reporter. You must report whether or not the patient consents to a report. So if they say no, or if they consent or not consent, that's one thing. But you still need to report it whether or not they consent if it's a mandatory reporting situation. And in this course, I get into the ethics involved with reporting, because you're violating the patient's privacy and autonomy sometimes by doing a report, but you're also demonstrating a key ethical concept called beneficence. And of course, there's legal aspects, and we get into that as well. So we talk about all that. And here's a very important thing to keep in mind. Reporting is not a substitute for thorough documentation in the medical record. The medical record is generally a more valuable source of documentation for legal cases and is critical to the patient's ongoing care. In other words, just because you get wrapped up in making a report or trying to decide if you should or shouldn't make a report doesn't mean you neglect your actual medical records. You have to still put in all the information in your medical records as you're doing this. And I think that's it for mandatory reporting. Thank you, guys. That's our little something different. Let's get into today's formula. Gan Cao Jiang, it's a twister. Gan Cao Gan Jiang, Ling Bai Zhu Tang. And as I mentioned earlier, it's basically, these are the Chinese names for the 4 herbs in this formula. So licorice, ginger, poria, and white atractylodes decoction. There are lots of other names for this formula. These include licorice, ginger, poria, and atractylodes. It sounds really same, but it doesn't have the white there. So, in fact, when you look at the Chinese, it's Gan Jiang Ling Zhu Tang. So it's much shorter. It just shortens up all the names. Licorice decoction, Gan Cao Tang. Decoction for fixed kidneys, Xuan Zhuo Tang. Dampness eliminating decoction, or Chu Shi Tang. Poria, ginger, atractylodes, and licorice decoction. So just kind of mix up everything, and again, use the shorter versions of the names. So Líng, Jiāng, Zhu, Gan, Tāng. Poria, ginger, white atractylodes, and licorice decoction, or Ling, Gan, Jiang, Bai Zhu, Gan Cao Tang. Shen Chu Tang, which we kind of got close to. Zhen Zhu Tang, CHU. And kidney fixity decoction. I kind of like that, kidney fixity decoction. So there's lots of different names, all just very similar scrambles of the name that we're talking about today. So this formula is in the subcategory of formulas that warm and transform water and dampness under the category of formulas that expel dampness. And this is according to Scheid and his team. That's one of our big textbooks that we use. Our other usual formulas textbook, Chinese Medical Herbal Formulas and Applications, Pharmacological Effects in Clinical Research by Chen and Chen, says it is in the warm formulas that dissolve dampness subcategory under the damp dispelling formulas category. In other words, pretty much the same thing, just using slightly different words in the translation. So let's talk about these formulas that expel dampness in general, and then we'll get into the specific subcategory of formulas here. So Scheid usually has a really good explanation of the overall category, and here's what they have to say about this overall category. Fluid physiology and pathology are at the foundation of Chinese medicine, and Chinese physicians have always been greatly concerned with damp disorders. In Chapter 71 of Basic Questions, if you're not familiar with Basic Questions, this is the Huangdi Su Wen, or the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicines, Huangdi Neijing Su Wen, so Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine. This is the oldest existing medical book, really, and it was written probably around 200 BCE, so it's been around for a while. And it is noted, it's in two different parts. One of them is the Basic Questions, the Su Wen is what we're talking about here. So Chapter 71 there says, it is noted that water constraint is treated by breaking it up. Chapter 14 of the same book lists sweating, diuresis, which is urination, and elimination via the stools as three possible routes for eliminating water excess. A passage in Chapter 74 elaborates on the nature of herbs used for these purposes. Damp pathogens in the interior are treated with bitter, warming medicinals assisted by sour and bland medicinals, because one can use bitterness flavor to dry dampness and the bland flavor to drain it. If dampness is more pronounced above, leading to heat, it is treated with bitter, warming medicinals assisted by sweet and acrid medicinals to promote sweating and thereby arrest the disorder. Zhang Jing's discussion of cold damage and essential formulas from the Golden Cabinet offered formulas that translated these strategies into clinical practice. So this is another super mega ultra famous book, Discussion of Cold Damage and Essential Formulas from the Golden Cabinet. This is the oldest existing book we have on formulas, and it was written near 220 CE. It's almost 400 years after that Huangdi Neijing Su Wen that we just talked about. But so that's where this formula actually comes from, as we're going to find out, sort of. And so they have strategies that bring this into clinical practice. Many of these not only continue to be widely used today, but also served as platforms for the development of other formulas and strategies. By the Tang dynasty, so several hundred years later, the adage, drying can eliminate dampness, had become one of the 10 exemplary treatment principles in Chen Zhangqi's omissions from the classic of the Materia Medica, or the Ben Sao Shi Yu, written in 720 CE. And every epoch in the history of Chinese medicine since then has added to the ever-growing therapeutic arsenal in this group. The importance accorded to the qi dynamic by the various Jinyuan masters imparted a new stimulus to the treatment of damp disorders. So we talk about the Jinyuan masters in a previous Spur Observes, very, very important time period of expansion in Chinese medicine. Again, after the Tang dynasty, so we're kind of ticking through this historically. Most innovative, without doubt, was Zhang Yuansu and Li Dong Yuan's use of wind medicinals, or Fang Yao, to assist in the uplifting of middle burner qi and thus the transformation and dispelling of dampness. They also devised the strategy of separating and reducing, or Fen Xiao, which utilizes the different functions of the triple burner vis-a-vis the fluid metabolism as a method for treating complex damp pathologies. This strategy was later taken up by Ye Tian Shi and other exponents of the warm pathogen disorder current in Chinese medicine, who perfected it as one of the key methods in their treatment of damp warmth disorders. Dampness is a yin pathogenic influence that has a heavy, sluggish nature. Damp disorders progress slowly and linger in the body. Internally generated dampness is usually associated with improper eating habits, overindulgence in alcohol, and obsessive deliberation or other emotional behavior that injures the spleen. Manifestations include generalized and focal abdominal distension, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, painful urinary dribbling, or edema of the lower extremities. Dampness can also be externally contracted from living in a damp climate or environment or getting wet from rain or sweat. Manifestations of externally contracted dampness include chills and fever, a feeling of distension in the head and heaviness in the body, stiffness and pain in the joints, or superficial edema. Because it is not uncommon for conditions of dampness to present with both externally contracted and internally generated aspects, it must therefore be approached carefully in each case to gain a full understanding of its etiology and the underlying constitution of the patient. The word water or shui is often used in connection with dampness. Sometimes this word refers to the fluids in general, and sometimes specifically to edema or to an accumulation that is more distinct and localized than dampness. The latter usage is reflected in the adage, dampness is the permeation of water, while water is the accumulation of dampness. In this text, shui is translated as edema when it refers specifically to that condition, but otherwise we have left it simply as water. Problems with those organs that are most intimately connected with the process of water metabolism in the body often result in damp disorders. The three most important organs are the kidneys, which are said to govern water, the spleen, which controls water, and the lungs, which govern the ascending and descending aspects of water metabolism, known as the water pathways or shui dao. Among the yang organs, the triple burner and the bladder also have important connections with water metabolism, and therefore with dampness. If the qi is obstructed in the triple burner, there's no force behind the metabolism of water. If the bladder does not function smoothly and urination becomes difficult, the qi mechanisms of the triple burner can be affected by the backflow. Because dampness is a heavy, sluggish, pathogenic influence that readily hinders and obstructs the qi mechanisms, these formulas often include qi-regulating herbs. The value of such herbs in treating dampness is succinctly stated in Systematic Differentiation of Warm Pathogen Diseases, or Wenbing Taobian, written in 1798. When the qi mechanisms are transformed, dampness will likewise be transformed. For example, when the bladder qi is obstructed by dampness, these herbs can regulate the bladder qi and thereby provide an avenue for water and dampness to exit the body. The principal patterns of externally contracted dampness are damp heat and wind dampness, which are generally conditions of excess. Manifestations of damp heat include jaundice, painful urinary dribbling, and atrophy disorder. It is always important to carefully distinguish both the level burner at which the process is active and the pathogenic influence that predominates, and treat accordingly. When dampness is marked by pain, usually of the joints, and is sometimes accompanied by edema. Here it is also important to discern whether wind or dampness predominates. Furthermore, because these conditions lodge primarily in the channels, ensuring the free flow of healthy blood is an important aspect of treatment. When the flow in the channels is open, the wind has no place to lodge, hence the adage, when treating wind disorders, first treat the blood. In general, the formulas in this category are comprised of acrid, aromatic, and warm substances that dry dampness, or sweet, bland substances that leach out dampness. They should be used with extreme caution in cases of yin deficiency and depleted fluids. In patients with debility brought on by disease or pregnancy with edema or other signs of dampness, these formulas must be modified with spleen-strengthening herbs to protect the normal qi. So that was formulas that expel dampness. Let's go into the specific subcategory of formulas that warm and transform water and dampness. And this is the subcategory where this herb is is situated. So again, this is from Scheid et al., and they continue to describe the subcategory. The formulas in this section are used in treating patterns of dampness caused by cold or where cold and dampness clump together. The reasons for this may be yang deficiency or invasion of cold dampness from the outside. When the kidney yang is deficient and its qi loses the ability to transform water, the water becomes pathogenic by overflowing and causing edema, or stagnant and giving rise to dampness. Symptoms include urinary difficulty, edema, and lower abdominal numbness. Spleen yang deficiency can give rise to similar problems. Cold dampness, which has many etiologies, tends to settle in the lower parts of the body. It may lodge in the intestines, manifesting as thin mucus, or it may cause cloudy, painful urinary dribbling, leg qi, or various types of edema. Leg qi is sort of a term we use for edema of the legs, basically. To treat cold dampness, the formulas in this chapter rely on chief herbs that warm the yang and promote the resolution of dampness, such as Cinnamomum ramulus gui zhi, Aconites radix lateralis preparata, or zhi fuzhe, Poria, Líng, and Atractylodes macrophyllae rhizoma Bai Zhu. We actually use those last two in our formula. Depending on the pattern, they may be combined with deputies and assistants that strengthen the spleen and tonify the kidneys, or that regulate the qi. Herbs that strengthen the spleen and tonify the kidneys include Alpinia oxyphyllae, fructus or yijiren, Atractylodes macrocephala, rhizoma Bai Zhu, Licorice radix Gan Cao, we use both of those, Jujube fructus dadzao, and Aconites radix lateralis preparata, or zhi fuzhe. Kidney and spleen yang is essential in supporting the body's water metabolism, and in turn is easily damaged by cold dampness. This makes it essential to ensure its vitality. Herbs that regulate the qi, like Magnolia officinalis cortex or Hopo, Linderae radix Wu Yao, Aucklandia radix Mu Xiang, Citri reticulate pericarpium Chen Pi, or Aurike pericarpium Da Fu Pi, are used to open the qi dynamic in order to facilitate the dispelling of dampness. Okay, and that's the background for our formula of today. Let's get into what this formula does. What are its Chinese medical actions? According to Scheid and his team, they say this formula warms and transforms phlegm and thin mucus, strengthens the spleen, and resolves dampness. And Chen Chen says something similar. They say it warms yang and strengthens the spleen and dispels cold and dampness. So what are the indications for this formula? The actions are pretty succinct. The indications can be a little bit more, as we're going to see here. So Scheid and his team say this formula can be used for a heavy sensation in the body, cold and pain in the lower back, pressure in the lower back as if carrying a heavy weight, normal appetite and absence of thirst, and copious urine. The tongue will be pale with a white, moist coating that may be thick and greasy at the root, and the pulse will be submerged, thin, and moderate. This is called kidney disorder, or shen zhuo, a type of painful obstruction of the waist and lower back due to cold dampness. The etiology of this disorder commonly involves internal causes such as overwork and habitual sweating that weaken the normal qi and the invasion of cold dampness from the outside. The source text speaks of exposure to rain, walking in water, or sitting in damp places. In modern patients, this might be swimming for too long or in too cold water or not toweling off properly. The onset can be both acute and chronic. Dampness in the entire body causes a heavy sensation. As a yin pathogen, it tends to flow downward, settling in the lower back, where it obstructs the flow of qi and causes a cold sensation, pain, or pressure. Normal appetite and a lack of any particular thirst indicate that the functions of the middle and upper burners are unimpaired. Copious urination reflects attempts by the body to rid itself of dampness, implying that kidney function is normal too, and that the pathogen is settled in the skin and muscle layer. However, because the lower back is the residence of the kidneys and because the pain is fixed, the condition is referred to as a fixed kidney disorder. The tongue and pulse reflect the dampness settling in the lower burner. Chen and Chen say the clinical manifestations for this formula include cold and dampness in the lower body, coldness and pain of the lower back and body, feeling of extreme heavy sensation in the lower back, normal appetite and diet, absence of thirst, and normal urination. So where is this first mentioned? Both Scheid et al. And Chen both say the source is the Jingui Yao Lue, or Essentials from the Golden Cabinet. That was that book I was talking to you about earlier. That is the first existing book on Chinese herbal formulas. And that was written around 220 CE by Jiāng Jing, super famous Chinese doctor, Jiāng Jing. Let's talk about the ingredients of this formula. So the first ingredient we're talking about is glycerin. So we're going to kind of go through these in order of Gan Cao Gan Jiang, Fu Ling Bai Zhu. So the first herb is Gan Cao, or Glycyrrhizae radix. This is licorice, and we use 6 grams for this. And these herbs are in the category of herbs that tonify the qi. Its functions include it tonifies the spleen and augments the qi, moistens the lungs and stops coughs, moderates spasms and alleviates pain, moderates and harmonizes the characteristics of other herbs. And it's probably the most commonly used herb in our formulas for that last reason. It moderates and harmonizes the characteristics of other herbs. In this formula, Gan Cao harmonizes the function of the other herbs while also contributing to strengthening the spleen. Our second herb is Gan Jiang, or Zingiberis rhizoma. We're using 12 grams of this. This is dried ginger. So 12 grams of this in our formula, and it is from the herbal category of warm acrid herbs that release the exterior. And traditionally, it warms the middle and expels cold, warms the middle and expels cold. Oh, that's a double. Rescues devastated yang and expels interior cold, and warms the lungs and transforms thin mucus. This formula treats cold dampness obstructing the movement of qi and fluids in the skin and muscles, primarily in the lower back. This is what we're using in this formula. Well, that is what the formula does. Although the lower back is the seat of the kidneys, the kidney organ itself functions normally. It is unnecessary, therefore, to treat the kidneys directly. So Gan Jiang generally doesn't treat the kidneys directly, so that makes sense here. Rather, by warming the yang and eliminating the dampness, focusing primarily on the spleen due to its resonance with both dampness and the flesh, it is possible to effectively treat this disorder. The main herb for this purpose is acrid and warming Zingiberis rhizoma, or Gan Jiang. That's this herb here. It warms the middle, but also drives out wind-damp, painful obstruction, effectively addressing both the actual pathology and the background disposition. So really good herb for this. Our next herb is the third herb in our name, Fu Ling. So that is Poria, and we're using 12 grams of that again. And this is in the herbs that drain dampness. So this is probably the herb for the herbs that drain dampness. It traditionally promotes urination and leaches out dampness, strengthens the spleen and harmonizes the middle burner, strengthens the spleen and transforms phlegm, and quiets the heart and calms the spirit. And for this formula, because dampness in this pattern is relatively severe, bland Fu Ling is added as a deputy. It strengthens the spleen and promotes urination to eliminate dampness via the urine. The combination of Fu Ling and Gan Jiang warms the yang and dispels dampness, removing pathogenic qi without injuring the normal qi. And finally, our last herb is Bai Zhu, or Atractylodes macrocephalae rhizoma. This is White Atractylodes. We're using 6 grams of it, and this also comes from herbs that tonify the qi, but it's kind of dry in and of itself. So let's see, this herb tonifies the spleen and augments the qi, dries dampness and promotes water metabolism, stabilizes the exterior and stops sweating, and calms the fetus. And in this form, the bittersweet and warming Bai Zhu functions as the assistant. It tonifies the spleen qi even as it dries dampness. So it does 2 very important things for this formula. It's a nice tight 4-herb formula. It's a really nice little formula. So how's this prepared? Scheid and his team state this should be taken as a decoction, and the source text specifies that administration of the formula should cause the patient to experience a warm sensation in the lower back. That's nice. Scheid, as usual, Scheid and his team have an excellent commentary about this formula. Although modern textbooks frequently define fixed kidney disorder as a type of painful obstruction, it differs from other types of painful obstruction patterns in a number of ways. First, it conjoins only 2 rather than 3 pathogens, dampness and cold, while wind is absent. Second, cold dampness here is located in the skin and muscles rather than in the channels and collaterals, and is therefore treated via the spleen. And third, as indicated by the symptoms of heaviness throughout the body and coldness below the waist, the pattern involves more than a local accumulation of dampness. This is explained by Xu Bin in discussion and annotation of the essentials from the Golden Cabinet, or the Jingui Yaolui Lunju, written in 1671. The term fixed kidneys expresses a condition of something adhering and not moving. As protective qi issues from the lower burner, the kidneys being fixed by a pathogen means that dampness stagnates the protective qi. Hence, the entire body feels heavy. The formula thus focuses on promoting yang and dispelling dampness via the urine rather than sweating. Sweating and the use of herbs that dispel wind dampness would not be an appropriate strategy, in part because of the nature of the pathogen, and in part because the protective yang is hemmed in by dampness. Over time, physicians have extended the application of this formula to the treatment of girdle vessel disorders. This is based on a passage in chapter 29 of the Classic of Difficulties in the Nanjing, written in the Han Dynasty, anywhere from 25 to 220 CE. We've talked about the Wangdi Nei Jing. The Nanjing Classic of Difficulties is sort of explanatory text of the difficult issues that kind of come out of the Wangdi Nei Jing. And in there they quote, girdle vessel disorders are characterized by abdominal fullness. The lumbar area feels weak and as if one were sitting in water. This closely matches the description of the pattern for Gan Cao Gan Jiang, Ling Bai Zhu Tang, and essentials from the Golden Cabinet, the Jingui Yaolui, written in approximately 220 CE, as we've already mentioned, which speaks of a sensation, quote, as if one were sitting in water, quote, and, quote, the back being heavy, as if one were carrying a belt containing 5,000 coins, unquote. Another important indication is edema during pregnancy, for which discussion of illnesses, patterns, and formulas related to the unification of the 3 etiologies, the San Yin Ji Yi Bing Jiang Fang Feng, written in 1174, recommends the addition of Armanaceae semen or Xing Ren. That's apricot pit. Clinically, the key diagnostic markers suggesting use of this formula can thus be summarized as follows. Heaviness, coldness, or pain of the abdomen or back. The sensation of cold can be subjective or may be palpated. Heaviness may manifest as a sensation of numbness or insensitivity, and there may also be difficulty in bending from the waist. Excess water may manifest as increased urination, diarrhea or soft stools, sweating, saliva, phlegm, discharge, or increased secretions from the skin. Due to the underlying cold, these will usually not be malodorous, so they don't smell. Signs of dampness on the tongue, such as white, moist coating that may be thick and greasy at the root, accompanied by a pulse that is submerged, thin, and moderate. So that's commentary from Scheid and his team. Chen have a brief commentary that say, because this formula treats cold and dampness located in the lower back around the kidney area, it is also known as Shenzhuo Tang, or kidney fixity decoction. It is important to note that this formula treats cold and dampness affecting the muscles near the kidney area. It does not address kidney imbalance nor treat kidney diseases. So even though the kidney's in the name, it doesn't treat kidney issues directly. And then we have a lot of commentary. There's another book that is just a fantastic book that I like to refer when I can. This formula is discussed in Huang Huang's 10 Key Formula Families in Chinese Medicine, translated by Michael Max. And so this is where this formula, he has a nice commentary on this formula as well. So we're going to get into that right now. In it, he says, when the Renshen in Lijiang Wan is replaced with Poria Fuling, it becomes Licorice, Ginger, Poria, White Atractylodes Decoction, Gan Cao Gan Jiang, Fuling, Bai Zhu Tang. So this formula, which treats lower back pain from cold and dampness. Renshen, ginseng, is not used in this situation as there are no signs of emaciation, epigastric focal distension with firmness, or poor appetite. Fuling and Bai Zhu are used together here as they treat a sense of heaviness and lethargy, urinary difficulty, and superficial edema. The lower back should feel warm after taking this prescription, which we heard before. He also quotes Essentials from the Golden Cabinet, has the following description of this formula's action in treating lower back pain. These people's bodies feel heavy. There's a clear demarcation to the pain, much like they were sitting in a tub of cold water, and there is accompanying whole body edema. From the waist on down, it feels cold and painful. The back feels heavy as if carrying 5,000 coins. The distinctive characteristics of this type of lower back pain are cold pain, Ling Tang, and heavy pain, Zhong Tang. Cold indicates there is pathogenic cold, and heaviness indicates there is dampness. The Licorice, Ginger, Poria, and White Atractylodes Decoction presentation is as follows. 1. A cold feeling from the waist down with a feeling of heaviness and pressure or achy pain. 2. Edema or predisposition to edema. The entire body feels fatigued and sluggish. And 3. Dried ginger tongue. So this is something he explained earlier, and this is how I explain it. Pale or pale red tongue with a greasy coating that is usually white and greasy, but may be dark gray and greasy or white and slimy. This formula's presentation is often seen in patients who are overweight and have lived for a long time in a cold, damp environment. Their bodies usually feel heavy and tired. The joints and muscles often feel heavy and achy. They are predisposed to edema or watery stools, and the tongue has a white coating. This is a damp body type, much like those of the previously introduced ephedra and astragalus constitutions. When these type of people fall ill, they often experience dizziness, lower back and body aches, diarrhea, abdominal fullness, edema, or palpitations. Therefore, in practice, this formula, other than treating wind damp lower back pain, also can be used to treat symptoms of edema, joint pain, and diarrhea. So that's commentary from Huang Huang. Great commentary. So what are some modifications to this formula? Scheid discusses several modifications for this formula. For chronic backache and discharges in women, add carthamine floss or Honghua, which is a blood mover. For older patients with chronic backache and urinary frequency, add Aconitum radix lateralis preparata, Zhifudza, and Cervicornu di gelatinum or Lu Jiao Shuang. So Fudza is very warming and can be difficult to get. The Cervicornu di gelatinum is actually deer horn, and it's super expensive if you can find it. Probably shouldn't be using it for conservation issues, but some people do. Also for incontinence in both boys and girls up to the age of 14. For a more severe cold, add that Aconitum radix lateralis preparata or Zhifudza and Asari herba or Shishin. That would be the other one you could add in here. For more severe dampness, add Alismatis rhizoma zexie, Atractylodes rhizoma sangju. That's actually red Atractylodes. White is part of this formula. And Koisi semen or Yi Ren, that's Job's tears. It's pearl barley. For pronounced spleen deficiency, add ginseng radix or Renshen. Chen say, with severe pain, add Fudza, radix Aconitum lateralis preparata, and Shishin, radix et rhizoma. So similar to what was already mentioned. Huang Huang adds, when combined with Stephanian and Atractylodes decoction, Fang Qi Huang Qi Tang, it treats edema. With a Fedra decoction plus Atractylodes, Ma Huang Jia Zhu Tang, it treats chills without sweating and joint pain. Paired with frigid extremities powder of Sinisan, it treats chills, diarrhea, and frigid extremities. Comparisons. Scheid compares today's formula, and Scheid and his team compare today's formula with two other formulas. The first one is that one that was mentioned by Huang as well, Li Zhang Wan, or regulate the middle pill. Both formulas combine Zingiberis rhizoma Gan Jiang, Atractylodes macrocephalae rhizoma Bai Zhu, and Licorice radix Gan Cao. Regulate the middle pill, Li Zhang Wan adds ginseng radix or ren shen to tonify the middle burner. It focuses on patterns characterized by cold and qi deficiency of the spleen and stomach. Gan Cao Gan Jiang Ling Bai Zhu Tang adds Poria Ling to focus the formula on dispelling cold dampness, particularly from the lower back. The other formula is Poria, cinnamon twig, Atractylodes, and licorice decoction, or Ling Bai Zhu Gan Tang. Both formulas contain Poria Ling, Atractylodes macrocephalae rhizoma Bai Zhu, and Licorice radix Gan Cao. Poria, cinnamon twig, Atractylodes, and licorice decoction, Ling Bai Zhu Gan Tang adds Cinnamomum ramulus or guizhi, that's cinnamon twig, focusing the action of the formula on warming the yang and transforming the fluids to treat thin mucus, particularly in the epigastrium and abdomen. Gan Cao Gan Jiang Ling Bai Zhu Tang, on the other hand, adds Zingiberis rhizoma or Gan Jiang to focus on warming and dispersing the cold dampness. Continuing with comparisons, Chen say Ling Bai Zhu Gan Tang or Poria cinnamon twig Atractylodes macrocephalae licorice decoction and Gan Cao Gan Jiang Ling Bai Zhu Tang have similar ingredients and indications. So very similar to what was just said by Scheid and his team. They are both excellent formulas to strengthen the spleen, warm yang, and dispel dampness. Ling Bai Zhu Gan Tang uses Ling Poria as the chief herb and guizhi ramulus cinnamomum as the deputy herb. The main emphasis of this formula is to warm yang and dispel dampness to resolve tan yin or phlegm retention. Gan Cao Gan Jiang Ling Bai Zhu Tang uses Gan Jiang rhizoma zingiberis as the chief herb and Ling Poria as the deputy herb. The main focus of this formula is to warm the middle jiao, dispel cold, and dispel dampness to treat cold and dampness in the lower back. There we go. That's comparisons. Let's talk about some biomedical indications. Scheid and his team say with the appropriate presentation, this formula may be used to treat a wide variety of biomedically defined disorders, including acute lumbar strain, lumbar disc disease, sciatica, renal calculi, so that's kidney stones, chronic pelvic inflammatory disease, benign prostatic hypertrophy or BPH, enuresis or night urination, wet bed, acute gastroenteritis, eczema, allergic rhinitis, and chronic bronchitis. Chen says formula can be used to treat low back pain, sciatica, lumbago, enuresis, superficial gastritis, duodenal ulcer, arthritis, impotence, gastritis, atrophic gastritis, and diarrhea. So the science on this was interesting. There were no papers on this formula when searched for using Google Scholar or looking at the Cochrane Library, which are two of my go-tos. It's quite a rarity when I'm researching formulas, especially considering this is a Jiāng Jing formula. In other words, it's an important old formula, and the fact that there wasn't anything in the scientific literature was quite interesting. That in and of itself is quite a interesting fact. Drug-herb interactions. A couple of herbs in this formula may affect cytochrome P450 isozymes. So remember, cytochrome P450 is used in the metabolism of drugs, and so when something affects cytochrome P, certain aspects, certain isozymes or different types of cytochrome P450, it can affect drugs, either how they're either slowing up or quickening how it's metabolized. So Gan Jiang may inhibit cytochrome P450 2C19, and Gan Cao may induce cytochrome P450 2C9 and 3A4. Of those, we're always most worried about 3A4. Cytochrome P450-3A4 affects approximately 40 to 60% of drugs and is by far the most common subtype that drugs are using for metabolism. So anything that affects 3A4 has a much higher potential for a drug-herb interaction than those that do not. There does not appear to be any P-glycoprotein interactions with the herbs in this formula. And those are the two big issues we look at for herbs. There are others. We're starting to see some research, not a lot of it at this point, but we're starting to see some research on high protein binding with herbs. The problem is that looks at herb constituents, individual constituents, and that may or may not be an issue when you're talking about a whole herb. So I think there's a lot more research to be done, but these are the two big points we look at for drug-herb interactions. Concerns, not a ton of concerns here. Scheid and his team say heaviness of the body and backache due to damp heat must not be treated with this formula. Obviously, we don't want to treat it with damp heat because this actually adds heat to the system, so that's not a good thing. And heaviness of the body is fine. That is one of the things that we talk about that this formula is used for, but in addition to low back stuff. And so just generalized heaviness of the body is too general and non-specific, and what this formula doesn't treat that well enough. But if it also has that heaviness of the low back and low back pain, then this can also treat heaviness of the body. So you just don't want to use it with heaviness of the body as the only big sign or symptom. And that gets us through today's formula, today's Spurbs herbs. So that was today's formula: Gan Cao Gan Jiang, Ling Bai Zhu Tang, or Licorice, Ginger, Poria, and White Atractylodes Decoction. An interesting, if not commonly used formula that is among one of the first written about, is in the book where the first formulas were. We started by discussing mandatory reporting, and then we got into the formula, including its ingredients, commentary, the science, our concerns and cautions, as well as its potential drug interactions. The bottom line here is this is a great formula for cold dampness, especially of the lower body and the lower back. And so it's warming and it's damp clearing. So that's really what it's about. All in all, another exploration of a fascinating and useful Chinese formula. In our next episode in 2 weeks, we are going to be looking at another single Chinese herb, Jingjie, Schizenepida herba, or just Schizenepida. This herb is a relatively commonly used herb in the Chinese medical subcategory of warm, acrid herbs that release the exterior and can be used in colds, rashes, and even to help stop bleeding. As usual, we will explore all the intricacies of this herb as well as an explanation of its category. And as always, we will look at something a little different. Join us in 2 weeks for another interesting episode. I would like to thank you very much. If you like this podcast, please do us a humongous favor. Subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app. That just does wonders for us, and we thank you for even considering it. And remember, you can get CUs and NCC AOM PDAs at www.integrativemedicinecouncil.org. And you can get 20% off if you use that SH20OFF code. You get 20% off your entire order. And you can always get in touch with me at drgreg@spurbsherbs.com or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. Hope to hear from you. And thank you very much again. And as usual, we have a nice bibliography. Spurbs Herbs. The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy Dobbins,
Rogers,
Campbell.